These last few weeks, we've been talking about this text, Bodaisatta Shishobo, the Bodhisattva's 4 methods. And in the very first meeting where we talked about it, I mentioned that I feel like there's a kind of playful exchange or an interplay between these 4 methods and what are called the Brahma Viharas, the 4 abodes, or the 4 immeasurables. And, you know, I've played with that a lot over the last few weeks. And if you try to say that one equals the other, you can make lots of arguments for that, but then you can say, well, maybe this one actually equals this one. There's a little bit of play. We have, on the one hand, on the bodhisattva side, we have giving, loving speech, benefit action, and identity action. And on the other side, we have empathetic joy, compassion, is it loving? No. And equanimity. And what I want to say is, as much as you can play with that chart, there's one point where there's no question that these 2 texts are talking about the same thing. And that's the 4th on each one. It's identity action and equanimity. Identity action is a twist on equanimity. So I want to talk about that. I want to start with that. And it's a lot to cover, so we might not get all this done in one night. Equanimity, and we've talked about this recently. There's a kind of popular understanding of what equanimity is that has very little to do with what it really is. And that popular understanding seeps into Buddhism as well. There's an idea we have of what equanimity looks like. It's very cool, right? It's a bit detached. Nothing bothers it because nothing really touches it, right? It's a bit removed. And that's not without foundation. But equanimity, even as it's understood in foundational texts, includes a kind of embrace. There's an inclusivity to equanimity. And what I mean by that is that equanimity is this capacity, it's this ability to hold things, to hold what is in front of you, or if we want to get bigger, to hold all things without any resistance. We talk a lot about no pushing and no pulling. So whatever is in front of you, whoever is in front of you, you're able to include that in your experience without actually stepping away, without having to create distance. But also without necessarily getting sucked in. Now, why do I bring this up? I've been thinking about this. I think about this a lot, actually. When I was young, I would go to concerts and things with my friends. And my experience of that was always this. The music is really loud and everybody's really excited that this band is here. And even the people who maybe don't love that band so much, over the course of an hour or 2 hours, 3 hours, by the end, they're screaming. They're so excited and they're jumping up and down and they want an encore. And when the lead singer says, now we're going to play this song, or when they do they shout out to our hometown or something, people just lose their minds. It's really fun. And my experience of that from as far back as I can remember was that I couldn't do it. I could never quite ride that wave that other people were riding. And so I was watching my friends being so excited, and kind of absorbing this energy in the room. And I had a resistance to that. I had a kind of what we think equanimity looks like, which is I didn't get pulled in at all, but probably the way I did that was by pushing back. So while everyone else was jumping up and down, I was just standing there thinking, this is really interesting. This is fun, but I don't get what the hype is. And I felt that way even as a young person playing with my friends sometimes. You know, everyone gets so excited about something, so angry, so disappointed, so happy. And often I didn't relate. I think there's a kind of a spectrum of natural capacity for touching into what's happening in front of us. And I think that we tend to fall on one side or the other, not in the middle. That's why I'm bringing this up. Because there are people like me who, you know, I envied my friends. They were having a better time than I was having. I wanted to feel that thing. I wanted to feel outside of myself in a sense that would make so that I would jump up and down, right? For whatever reason, from the time I was young, that was difficult for me. There's the other side, I think, that we naturally fall into, which is that there's a part of us that's looking for that thing to jump into, right? It's not so much that we're pushing or pulling, it's that we're looking to be pulled or we're looking to be pushed. We want to kind of step off of that ledge into that experience of letting go. Maybe because it's freeing, maybe because it's cathartic, maybe because it has a sense of connection. Equanimity is kind of neither of those things and both. And so as we're talking about this, I think it's first interesting to just ask yourself where you think you fall on that. Not just now, but how has that changed in your lifetime? I suspect that for many people, they're in one place when they're younger, and then it changes as they get older. Some people, they probably stay the same the whole time in terms of that, the kind of willingness to enter into a different kind of energy. So that's my preamble. Identity action. Identity action means not to be different, neither different from self nor from others. That's immediately interesting. Okay. We're talking about connection. We're talking about a recognition of connection. And not even different from self, right? So an internal stepping back, an internal placing yourself at a remove also is not in alignment with this idea of identity action. For example, it is how in the human world, the Tathagata identifies himself with human beings. Because he identifies himself in the human world, we know that he must be the same in other worlds. So we're using this example of connection by saying that the Buddha, this comes from a Mahayana idea that the Buddha isn't just a normal person. The Buddha arrives in a particular package in order to be beneficial to others. So the Buddha arrives here as a human being, not just because that's skillful, but because there is a complete identification with his audience being humans. So the Buddha arrives as human because there is perfect identification with humans. And because that is complete, because there is no gap, then if he goes to another planet, if he goes to another reality to teach there, we know in a sense that it's the same Buddha because the defining aspect of that Buddha is that perfect identification with whoever it is. It isn't that the Buddha changes in one context, from one space to another. It's that the Buddha is always available and always permeable to the same degree in each circumstance. When we realize identity action, self and others are one suchness. Harps, poetry, and wine make friends with people, with heavenly beings, and with spirits. Now, I had to look this up. Harps, poetry, and wine, that comes from a Chinese poem in which the three companions are harps, poetry, and wine. And the idea in the poem, I don't have it in front of me, is that they kind of chase each other around, right? That if you get harps going, then wine is going to show up at some point. And once you have harps and wine, there's going to be some poetry. That's going to kick in. And once poetry starts in, the harps are going to need to keep going, right? That there's this kind of natural energy that feeds itself among these three things. So that's one set. And then we have this other set of beings, which are people, heavenly beings, and spirits. So Dogen is using these, he's juxtaposing these two things. As one, there are these three kind of activities in a sense, but we're personifying them: harps, poetry, and wine. And then we have people, heavenly beings, and spirits. They're all friends, all of them, right? Anyone can participate in any of this in any way they want. People befriend harps, poetry, and wine. We know that's true. There is a principle that harps, poetry, and wine befriend harps, poetry, and wine. That people make friends with people, that heavenly beings befriend heavenly beings, and that spirits befriend spirits. This is how we study identity action. So this is all just a little bit of a linguistic trick. On one hand, he's saying we have all these disparate things, and they're all friends. But then he's saying there's this other principle, which is that to be a friend of a person, you have to be a person. To be a friend of a harp, you have to be a harp. Therefore, in order for the first to be true, the second has to be true. If I become friends with a harp, that means that I identify as harp. I identify with harp. I know it's funny to use something like harp in this context when none of us probably have harps playing a big role in our lives, but I'm going to roll with it. That in order for me to identify deeply with another being, with another object, with an action, with a space, with a community, I can't have the idea that there's me and there's that, or there's me and there's them. That's different, right? That's something more like when two opposing sides come together at a negotiation table and they try to reach some sort of détente. Right? They come to an agreement about how they're going to be with one another. That's not the same. In order for that to work as that, there has to be a clear holding to the idea that you are you and I'm me. You represent what you represent and I represent what I represent. And now these two distinct things are meeting. What this is describing is a different way of understanding what connection is. That if you connect with music, It's not because you're you and music is music. It's because you find the music in you, and you find yourself in that music. In practical terms, we might say that the boundary is blurred. What Dogen is saying is that the boundary doesn't exist. Next week, I want to talk about this more, and I want to talk about what this looks like as practice. But for now, I want to leave you with this question. It's a question we come back to all the time, which is, what part of this is easy for you? What's the thing that makes it past your defenses easily? What's the thing for which you are a sponge, for example? Something where your walls just come down. Is it certain kinds of stories where you're willing to give yourself over completely to a certain kind of narrative or a certain kind of character? Is it a certain kind of music? Is it a certain kind of person? Is it a certain kind of activity? When you're around a lot of people who are dancing, do you find it difficult not to dance? Whatever that is, pay attention to it. Pay attention to it this week. Try to notice what those things are, because recognizing that informs the rest of this conversation. There are things out there that we don't defend ourselves from, for whatever reason. Those things, in the context of this kind of teaching, are incredibly valuable, both as they are and as touchstones for us to understand. And I'll stop there for a minute.